basement, I used to work at a fast food restaurant in my early 20s. After a few years, I was promoted to a management position and moved to a smaller store in a town called Park City, Illinois. One really interesting thing was that there was a guy who would come into the store I previously worked in. He was a really large guy who kind of reminded me a bit of the lead singer of the group Blues Traveler. He dressed a little similarly too, and he always came into the store holding this cane that he didn't have to use for walking. The other thing I remember is that he always ordered a triple cheeseburger meal, large size. I was always friendly with the guy in the previous store, but that was as far as it went. I never talked to him very much or any more than I normally would have from any other regular customer. However, when he began coming into the store in Park City, which was much smaller, much less busy, the guy and I began to start talking more, and we actually began considering each other friends. His name was Paul, and he would come into the restaurant between 2 and 5 p.m. a couple times every week. We were normally very dead at that time period, so I could just talk to a customer for a while if I felt like it. He was unemployed, but had a computer programming job for like 17 years. Unfortunately, the company had laid off a lot of people. I think that his wife was a nurse or something. I know he watched a lot of movies. He would always show me his collected ticket stubs when he came in. He watched The Matrix a lot of times and kept telling me how good of a movie that it was, but at the time I had no interest in seeing it. I figured it was yet another virtual reality movie, and I hadn't seen any movies with that concept actually be good. There was one day that was a bit interesting to me. He had come into the restaurant with a man he called Reverend Bob. They had a taped episode of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, another thing I didn't watch at the time, and we're talking about that and some other things. Paul introduced me to Bob as someone who had studied American Indian shamanism, and we all began talking about ghosts and things. Bob mentioned to me that although Paul never believed him, he had seen a ghost in Paul's house one time. I don't always or never believe someone when they talk about a ghost sighting. I take each explanation at face value on its own perceived merit, but I was mostly interested in this because it was a friend of mine and his buddy, and they both didn't agree on if there really was a ghost or not. Anyhow, at the time, Paul told me that he would take me over to his house in case I wanted to see if there really was a ghost there, and I was pretty interested in that. At the time, I lived a bit away from the store. I had a place much closer to the one I had previously worked out, and Paul lived pretty close to the one I was a manager at. When I first got over to Paul's house, it was actually the perfect weather to be looking at a haunted house. If nothing else, it was a good atmosphere setter. Now, at the time, I guess, I considered myself very spiritual and open-minded about that sort of thing. I had never seen a ghost or anything like that. I had done some things like involve myself in a spirit quest, and I had been to a sweat lodge once and had seen some things too, but I had never seen or really knew if I believed in ghosts or not. I didn't really disbelieve in them either. I only mentioned that because I had no idea what to expect if I actually would see a ghost. And when we went into Paul's house, I experienced something, a feeling unlike any that I had ever experienced before. I am going to do my best to describe it, but I am not sure how well I will be able to do this. It was like no matter where I stood, anywhere in the house, I felt like someone was peeking around the corner looking at me. Paul noticed immediately how distracted I got and asked me if I felt something. I wasn't able to even explain it to him as well as I explained it here, but it was the creepiest feeling that I had ever experienced in my entire life, and no matter what, I couldn't shake the feeling. Paul showed me throughout the house. That feeling lingered the whole time. He showed me the bedrooms, the study, and then we went down into the basement. He had this game in the basement he wanted to show me. He also had a huge collection of Pokemon cards, and he showed me those too. We played a couple games, and I had a fun time hanging out with him, despite the fact that I was not able to shake that odd feeling, but I was able to relax and pretty much have a good day. When we were going to go up to the main floor, wanting to get something to eat, I let him go up the stairs first. The stairs were just wooden boards set off in a corner of the basement. As I was walking up the stairs, I was startled to see two green lights, as if they were eyes, appear in the darkness under the stairs. I jumped back off the stair and then saw something move in the dark. Paul noticed what happened. Before I could ask him anything, he asked me, "Did you see the green eyes under the stairs?" He then flipped on the light switch, which then showed that there was absolutely nothing under those stairs, much less anything that could have made the lights. He explained to me that he had never seen the green eyes before, but the Reverend Bob, the guy he had mentioned earlier, had seen them once and told him about them. He hadn't mentioned it to me previously because if I were to see them, he didn't want it to be because of the power of suggestion from him. But him telling me what I saw before I mentioned it to him definitely proved to me that I had seen something and that I have no explanation for it. Paul and I hung out occasionally for a while after that, but I never had an experience like that again.
I know it sounds like something straight out of a movie, but it's 100% what happened to me about 24 years ago, when I was still relatively newly married. My then husband and I moved into a townhouse-style apartment. 2 floors of our apartment were on the second and third floors of the building, and the management office and mailbox area was almost directly below us on the ground level. Important for later. The woman who managed the building was older, didn't care for the property well, and usually spent most days chain-smoking Camel non-filters in her office and being a hateful old racist. Imagine renting a place from Juno, the social worker from Beetlejuice, but less helpful. She really resented what we had the townhouse, claiming we lied about my being pregnant when we moved it, because she didn't want to rent that unit to people with kids. She also made a few disparaging remarks about my husband due to his race. She was a real peach, truly. So after kiddo was born, I was a som, just busy keeping the house clean and the baby occupied without a car or local mom friends. After lunch, the kiddo needed a bath. Anyone who's fed a 9-month-old baby food knows the mess that can happen. So I went upstairs and ran the tub. Soon I had the baby sitting happily splashing in one of those suction cup bath seats. Important to note, it's the middle of winter and we had no heat, an issue I'd been fighting Juno, the landlord, about for a while, among other maintenance issues like my arcing ceiling fan or the garbage disposal that was held on with duct tape and leaked. We basically had to keep a space heater or two in every room to keep the chill off. I had taken one of the space heaters in the bathroom to keep the bathroom warm enough for bath time and had it sitting out of reach and splashing distance on top of the bathroom counter. I was standing in the bathtub, getting ready to lift the baby out, when all of a sudden, the space heater started to rock back and forth when it had not been rocking before. I had this horrible feeling of dread as I looked at the heater, and I just reacted because I knew I couldn't get both of us out of the tub in time. I reached down to grab the baby seat, ending up pulling it up off the tub and dropping the baby over the side of the tub to the bathroom floor. Just as the heater got to the end of the cord, it thumped into the shower door, bounced off the edge of the tub and landed on its side on the floor a couple inches away. It shut off, had auto shut off in case it got tipped over. When I looked over to the corner of the bathroom, that part of the room seemed to just get darker, like it was filling up with shadows. There was no smoke, no change in lighting, no windows, so no sun going behind a cloud. It said it was just darker. I also started to smell cigarette smoke. Camel non-filters, which I knew the smell of well from being in Juno's office all the time to get things fixed. The smell was so thick it made me cough and my chest ached, but I couldn't see any smoke haze. And I felt this overwhelming sensation of hatred and malice, like someone was standing there giving me a death glare. I grabbed the baby and a towel and ran downstairs. I was so freaked out I couldn't bring myself to go back up there, so I used some diapers from the diaper bag and kept the baby wrapped in the towel and cuddled up to stay warm. I stayed down there the entire rest of the day until my husband got home. Every so often, I'd look up the stairs at the bathroom, but I didn't want to take the baby up there, and I was afraid to leave him alone downstairs. When he asked me why the baby wasn't dressed, I told him about the heater and the smoke in the bathroom, and he went up to check, figuring it was yet another maintenance issue. There was no electrical issues, no damage to the outlet, smoke, no cigarette smell. He put the heater back on the counter and turned it on, watched it for a few minutes, and it didn't rock, so it didn't rock itself off the counter earlier. He laughed it off, but later that day, we heard Juno's adult son downstairs near the mailboxes yelling his head off at people. And that's when we found out she'd had a massive heart attack in her office earlier that day, and he'd found her dead in her chair, with a Camel non-filtered still in her hand.